Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Debits and Credits with Haas and Dawe. And today we're going to talk about the notary and best practices for notaries from an escrow perspective, and what happens when there's a notarial act of somebody signing a document where you're going to be involved as the escrow agent, the escrow holder, and how it involves and impacts your job trying to get the escrow transaction from start to finish. So let's start with some of the basics, and that notaries are required to be registered with the Secretary of State, and depending on which state they're at. Now, in today's world, it is not uncommon for the notary to be from a different state other than California, depending on where the real estate is, depending where the lender's coming from, and other impacts on your escrow transaction. There's also something known as RON, which is remote online notary. And this is something that's new coming out that is impacting the transaction as well, where people are able to do the notary in a remote setting. Now, California has been very cautious about allowing such transactions, but other states are a little more active in doing so. Concern always has to do with scams and frauds, and is the right person being notarized and so on. But let's start at the beginning that the notary you're going to be using will be registered with the Secretary of State, and that person can be checked with the Secretary of State to make sure they actually are registered and licensed to act as a notary. Now, when you're using a notary for escrow, which is almost on every file in that if or it affects any type of documents, and whether it be a loan, like on a refinance, or a loan as part of a purchase, or even where there could be like a note and a loan with regards to a bulk sale, where there's a loan between the buyer and the seller. There can be a notary required when there's a trust involved, where there's a trust certification, and that needs to be notarized. Deeds, the grant deeds, the deeds of trust, these are all documents that need to be notarized. And so it's really a question of being cautious about the notary that's being selected, paying attention to detail. You want to be sure that a notary or a notary company is being used is one that you know and you trust. Don't just accept a notary that a lender has selected, or that a broker or an agent has selected if you're not comfortable with that person. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that no one's going to come back to you and say, well, you allowed a notary to be used who was not authorized, or was somebody who was helping to perpetrate a fraud. In the case where, let's say, there's a fake seller involved or a fake buyer involved that could be involved in trying to do an illegal transfer of property, or trying to commit lender fraud, where they're allowing money to be borrowed against a property that nobody actually authorized. Also, you want to be careful about the way the invoicing is done from the outside notary. You need to make sure that the invoice is referencing the correct escrow file and correct property, that the correct parties who are signing the documents in the session, that the fees being charged are in line with regulated and common practice charges. It's very common that a lender may require the use of their preferred outside notary, and that's okay too, as long as you're comfortable with having worked with that lender before, or being able to check on who the notary is or what notary company is being used. It comes down to the fact that if you're not comfortable with the notary, then you are able to chime in and say, well, we need to find a notary that we know is reputable. The escrow company um, is involved, can be involved in so much litigation and so much liability, that you want to be careful about which notary firm is being used, who the notary person is. Are they registered? Are they licensed? Do you know anything about them? So that it's not going to come back later to have you dragged into the liability or the litigation of where it's a notary that's gone bad. Now, we talked about making sure that about the charges, what can be charged. Well, in California, there's a statutory notary charge. It's $15 per signature, and it can be per signature, meaning it's not per document or total documents. It's for every signature that's being notarized. It can be $15. So if you have two spouses on a deed of trust that's being notarized, or you have two siblings on a trust certification that's being notarized, you can charge $15 for each person where the signature is being notarized. If it's someone where the notary now is traveling to the person, there can be a travel fee. There can be a signing fee for the service. If it's something where it is being done after the normal business hours, there can be an after hours fee charged. And so this also all these charges involve not only an outside notary company or an outside independent notary, but someone we refer to as an in-house notary. An in-house notary is someone who's an employee of your company, who not only is acting either as an escrow officer or as an escrow assistant, but also is acting in this case now as the notary. And in this case, you have to be careful because this person now is wearing two hats. One as an employee of the company, but also as an outside contractor acting in his or her own way as an independent contractor, as an outside notary, and being paid directly as a notary. And this is where you, as management of the escrow company, you want to be careful about what the fee is being charged, because this person who's already being paid as an employee is now being paid as an outside person, as an independent contractor, and making sure that the notary fees are in line with customary practice. And so if it's something where the in-house, we call again the in-house notary, the employee of the company, is doing the signing during normal business hours inside the company's location, it wouldn't be fair to charge a travel fee. And if it's being done in the company's office, but after 5 o'clock, after they're no longer on the clock, so to speak, as an employee, it wouldn't be right to charge a travel fee, but it would be okay to charge an after hours fee. So you want to be careful about the fees being charged. Now, all these invoices as well, in terms of the person being notarized and who's performing the notary service, there needs to be an invoice presented to the customer, and where the customer is aware of that they're being charged. And if it's someone where it's an in-house notary, that customer needs to be signing the invoice at the time the notary service is being performed. Now, if it's an outside notary, a completely independent person or company doing the notary, then the invoicing could be a little bit different, because at that point, the notary company or the outside notary will be sending the invoice to you as the escrow person, the escrow professional, who will be then paying for the notary service out of the escrow. And that one doesn't necessarily have to be signed by the person being notarized, but there does clearly need to be an invoice of what is being charged. And on the invoice, it should break down what's being charged, meaning how many documents were signed at $15 per signature, how much for a travel fee, how much for an after hours fee, how much for a signing service, etc. And it clearly needs to be stated so the person being notarized is aware of what the fee is and what they're paying for. Now, from a liability risk, well, if the notary is an outside company or someone who's not working for the escrow company, there's probably a higher risk relative to, do you know who this person is or who this company is, and are you certain that the notary that they're providing you has been done properly? If it's an employee of the escrow company, then you have liability risks to make sure the person who's doing the notary did their due diligence. Did they get proper identification? Do they have copies of the driver's license? Do they have copies of a passport? Whatever is being used to verify the identity of the person signing the notary. Have they done their due diligence under the notary code? Now, there's also an association called the National Notary Association that also has standards and guidelines that people need to follow as well. So it's a question of making sure that you're limiting liability, limiting risk, that when you're getting a document back that has been notarized, you have confidence that has been done properly, and the person who's signing as a notary has followed the guidelines that need to be followed. Now, reality is perception, and perception is reality. And keep in mind that from the customer's eyes, and the person who's signing the documents that are being notarized, what's their perception of the process? What's their perception of the transaction? What's their perception of having the notary come and doing the signing? Did the notary properly educate the person signing the documents of what they're signing? Do they understand what a deed of trust is? Do they understand what a trust certification is? Do they understand all the lender's documents that are being signed are something that they're aware of? Are they aware about a due on sale clause on the loan? Are they aware about um, if there's a premature uh, payment of principal or prepayment of principal? Does the loan um, have instructions or clauses say, well, they can only prepay so much of the principal on an annual basis, and so on? So has the notary been doing the proper job of informing the person being notarized? And so this is where making sure that the perception of the customer, or we also call it an expectation standard, is being met. The expectations of the person being notarized are is that being satisfied, that they know what they're signing, and that it's everything to allow the escrow transaction to go through timely, properly, without problems. Now, best practices, again, listing the documents that are being signed, a deed of trust, a trust certification. Um, Sometimes people will have the seller proceeds instruction notarized. Do the sellers want a wire transfer? Do they want a check? Do they want a cashier's check? And escrow commonly will now have this instruction notarized, along with the fact of how let's say it's an outgoing wire transfer, how the seller is presenting information on what that wire is about, the bank account information, etc. And so there are lots of times that documents are going to be notarized that are affecting your escrow transaction that you want to make sure are being done properly, and that the invoice for what's being done is properly detailed. What documents are being notarized? Is there a signing service? And so on, so that doesn't come back to bite you later with the person saying, "I never agreed to pay that," and so on. Now, we another excuse me, another good practice we'd like to talk about is, let's say you have an employee of the escrow company doing the notary, and they're charging for their service as an independent contractor, and they're charging so much for the signatures, so much for the documents, so much for the signing service, so much for going after hours, so much for traveling, whatever it is. And the customer has signed that invoice, and it's come back and brought to the escrow file. Now, commonly, as in probably 90% of the time, that employee's service as an independent contractor also is being paid for from the escrow directly, from the escrow trust account, and being charged to either the seller or the buyer, or both, depending on who is paying for the service. But we recommend that when that payment is made, when the check is written from the escrow trust account, from that escrow transaction to the notary, who is an in-house employee of the company as well, that that person does not sign that check. That it be other people in the office who are signing that payment to the independent contractor notary. That way, again, it's an anti-fraud measure, so that you as management of the escrow company, you know that there's more scrutiny being paid, or just basic scrutiny being paid, knowing that who's getting paid from the escrow transaction, and that they're not taking advantage of the situation and charging a higher than customary fee for the notary service. So we recommend that any payment to an employee from an escrow not be signed by that employee. Find other people in the company who are check signers to be signing that check. So the notary process, from an overall standpoint, is pretty straightforward. It's a document that's required by either by escrow, by the county, by the lender, by any state regulator, that a document be notarized, that proof of the person signing the document is given, again, whether it be from a driver's license, whether it be from a passport, and knowing that as per the notary instructions, that a thumbprint is delivered into the notary journal that's being maintained by the notary, and that this allows the transaction to go forward, that the lender knows that the proper person is signing the loan documents, from the county assessor's office and the county recorder's office, knowing that the proper person is signing the grant deed transferring the property, and that from the escrow standpoint, knowing that the proper person who is trustee of the trust has signed the document, and that the trust certification has been notarized, so that escrow can rely on the fact that the right people are signing on behalf of the trust for this escrow transaction. So there's a lot going on with the escrow best practices. It's something that you want to be comfortable with, At the end of the day, if you're not comfortable with who the notary is that's been selected, then you step in and say, we need to find a different notary that we know we are comfortable with so that we don't have any claims later or possible claims later, whether it be with the title company who has to pay out a title claim or with escrow having to face a litigation situation, that you can move forward with the escrow transaction to a smooth closing. So that's today's topic on notary best practices, and that'll conclude this episode of Debits and Credits with Haas and Dawe.